It had been 8 years since I'd last heard my daughter's voice, and yet the first thing I felt wasn't emotion. It was strangeness, like getting a call from a wrong number, except I recognized that hesitant rhythm from her very first. Hello. No, Mom. No question about how I'd been living. On the other end of the line, my daughter, Penelope Hall, sounded so much older, so much harder, and so unfamiliar that my heart ached in a way that felt ice cold. She circled with a few questions, asking if I still lived in the same place, how work was going, and how my health was. I could hear the probing in every pause, as if she were stepping carefully across thin ice, not to come closer to me, but to test whether I still had anything of value left. And then, in less than 2 minutes, the call landed exactly where she had wanted it to. The house, assets, paperwork. If something happened later on, how would the inheritance be handled? I laughed a short, dry laugh so cold that even I could taste the bitterness in my throat. Not because I was cruel, I laughed because the irony was too much. The person who had blocked my number, blocked my email, and even blocked every birthday message for 8 years was now calling to talk about inheritance, as if all we were missing between us was one administrative conversation. I leaned back in my chair, looked out the window in front of me, and said slowly, "You want to hear my side? You locked it away yourself 8 years ago." There was exactly 1 beat of silence on the other end, and then Penelope's voice sharpened immediately. She said she hadn't locked anything away, that if I had really wanted to stay, I wouldn't have walked out after the divorce. She said I had chosen my freedom over my family, chosen a life of my own instead of being a mother, that her father had carried everything alone after I disappeared. Every sentence, every word, fell like an indictment she had memorized long ago. I didn't defend myself right away. 8 years had taught me that some people don't come to listen, they come to read the sentence over your face one more time. I let her finish, then I spoke, low and steady. I texted you. I paused for a beat. I sent you letters. Another beat. I sent emails, left messages, tried every way I could to explain. Not for a few weeks, for years. Every single path was blocked. She fired back almost at once, saying that was just my way of making excuses too late. But in that moment, I heard something that chilled me more than the judgment itself. The way she chose her words, the way she stressed phrases like abandon the family, selfish, and playing the victim. That was not the voice of a daughter who had grown up nursing a hurt all on her own. It was William Mitchell's voice echoing through her throat, almost intact. I gripped the phone so tightly my hands started to hurt. The wound from that divorce had never truly healed. I had only learned how to live alongside it. But hearing my daughter repeat each distortion that man had once scattered everywhere, I understood something more cruel than being hated. Being hated through a story someone else had written for her. I didn't beg. I didn't play the role of the heartbroken mother waiting for her child to come back. Yes. I had endured too much, too long, not to know when to draw the line. Penelope, if you're calling me just to ask what I'm going to leave you, then I'll answer you right now. You do not get to walk into the final chapter of this story when you refuse to read the beginning. She exhaled hard, as if she were trying to hold on to her composure. I heard a chair scrape on her end, heard the irritation she was forcing down. I knew she still wanted to keep asking, wanted to push the conversation back toward property, but I wasn't going to let her control the call anymore. Don't ask what I'm leaving you, I said, my voice colder than I expected. Unblock me first, then read how hard I tried to hold on to you. This time, Penelope didn't argue, she didn't cut me off, she didn't throw out another accusation. There was only the sound of her breathing, quick and quiet, but enough to reveal the first crack in the certainty someone had spent 8 years molding inside her. That silence was what sent me hurtling back into the past, to where everything first broke apart, to the divorce hearing where I was turned into the guilty one before I even had the chance to open my mouth. Before everything fell apart, if anyone had asked about my marriage to William Mitchell, most people would have said I was lucky. He spoke with restraint, knew how to pull out his wife's chair in front of other people, remembered to buy gifts on the kinds of occasions that made outsiders sigh and say decent men were rare these days. William was very good at protecting his image. He never raised his voice in public, never let anyone catch him losing control. That was exactly why, when I started growing tired, started withdrawing, started saying I felt suffocated inside my own home. People looked at me with confusion first, then disappointment after. Inside the house, it was different. William controlled everything, with a kind of gentleness that made it hard to resist. He asked where I was going, who I was meeting, and what time I'd be home in a voice that sounded caring. He took my bank card and said it was easier if he handled things. He looked through my phone and laughed, saying what secrets should a husband and wife have. At first, I thought it was just the habit of a perfectionist husband. Later, I understood that he was breaking my life into smaller and smaller pieces so he could hold every one of them in his hands. Every time I reacted, William would calmly look at me as if I were the one overreacting. He loved saying, "You always make such a big deal out of everything." That one sentence, repeated often enough, at just the right moments, was enough to make me start doubting myself. I explained why I was upset, and he said I was too sensitive. I said I needed space, and he said I was selfish. I wanted to manage my own money, and he asked what I was hiding. Little by little, I lived like a defendant in the very house I had helped pay for, needing a reason for everything I did, weighing every word before I spoke. The more I tried to explain myself clearly, the more I was turned into a difficult woman. So when the divorce happened, it wasn't an explosion. It was the final stage of a slow decay that had dragged on until I was almost exhausted. William, on the other hand, seemed like he had been waiting for that day. In mediation, and then in court, he sat with his back straight, lowered his voice just enough, and spoke about me as though he were describing a cold wife who cared only about money, who was quick-tempered, who had grown distant from her family. He spoke with a perfectly measured kind of pain, enough for people to feel sorry for him, not suspicious of him. What hurt me most was not the courtroom. It was Penelope sitting there and looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. She was still young, still naive enough to think the person who spoke more softly had to be the one telling the truth. William used that exact weakness. I know he told her I had someone else, that I wanted to leave the family so I could keep the money for myself. I could have fought back. I could have dragged out the things he kept hidden, the shady transfers, the relationships he had behind the family's back. But I didn't. I chose to bite down and stay silent because I did not want my daughter to look at her father as a shameful man. And in return, I was crucified by that very silence. Jade Brooks came to see me once around that time. She held me so tightly, her eyes red with tears, but she still blamed me for being too stubborn, said that if only I had spoken sooner, things might have turned out differently. Connor Turner leaned completely to William's side. He believed William's calm manner, believed the neatly arranged logic of his story, and in his eyes, my unraveling was only proof that I was unstable. The adults standing around that marriage each held half the truth, then pieced those halves together into the wrong conclusions. Penelope watched all of it, and of course, she drifted toward the story that sounded more reasonable. After the hearing, I sat alone in the cramped rental kitchen and understood for the first time that I had not only lost a marriage, I was also losing my daughter's willingness to hear me out. That hurt even more than signing the divorce papers. It felt like being erased from my own life story, while someone else stood up and told it in my place with a voice so convincing no one thought to question it. That night, while sorting through a box of old things left behind, I found William's old phone. The power button had been broken for a long time, but it still turned on when I plugged it in. I wasn't planning to look, I truly wasn't. But a message lit up on the lock screen and made my hand go still. The sender wasn't me. Only part of the text showed, but it was enough to make the blood in my body turn cold. It mentioned Penelope, mentioned the way the girl will look at her mother, and mentioned the need to make sure Layla is the one who leaves in everyone's eyes. My hand was shaking as I held that phone. For the first time, after all of it, I had something in my hands that could turn the story upside down. But at that same moment, I understood something even more horrifying. I had been set up in this play from very early on, earlier even than the day I thought my marriage had first begun to crack. After that phone call, I pulled my old phone out from the bottom drawer of the wooden dresser, something I had put away a long time ago because every time I touched it, it felt like being dragged back into the worst stretch of my life. It took forever to boot up, and one corner of the screen was cracked, but every line of old data was still there. I spent nearly an entire afternoon going through messages, screenshots, call logs, and even emails I had once sent to myself, just to preserve proof that I had tried to reach my daughter. The more I read, the more something terrifying began to take shape, not in some sudden explosive revelation, but like a cord tightening slowly around my throat. There were days when I texted Penelope saying I would pick her up after school, and the original messages were still on my phone. Yet a few days later, I would get a cold reply from her, accusing me of breaking my promise, of leaving her standing there alone. Back then, I thought maybe she had misunderstood, or maybe William had simply forgotten to pass the message along. Now, looking closely at the timeline, I understood it was not forgetfulness. There were message threads cut off in strange places, calls that lasted only a few seconds before dropping, just enough for the system to register that a call had been made, even though no one could have actually spoken. I even found old screenshots I had saved myself, where the words I sent Penelope were completely different from the words she later used to blame me. As if there had been a quiet hand between my daughter and me, warping everything, turning a planned meeting into a rejection, an apology into indifference, an open door into one slammed shut without mercy. I sat there numb for a long time before I could finally call it what it was. William had not just spoken badly about me, he had controlled the flow of information. He never gave Penelope the chance to see me through her own eyes. He handed my daughter a pre-edited version of me, one where I was always the one who came late, the one who forgot promises, the one more preoccupied with another man than with being a mother. The deepest pain was not being hated. The deepest pain was that I had been there all along, still reaching out, still calling her name through all those years, and yet in her mind, I had been turned into someone absent. I tried to see Penelope anywhere I could think of, outside the school gates, sitting in a car parked a little farther away so she would not feel embarrassed. Outside Isla Ward's house, where Penelope had gone for group study a few times. Even on her birthday, I brought a small cake and stood out on the street for a long time, hoping for nothing more than to catch one glimpse of her. One time, she came out and looked at me from a distance, her eyes so cold it felt like something sliced straight through my heart. She said, "You don't have to put on an act anymore. You were the one who left first, Mom." That sentence was too neat, too polished, too sharp. It was not the voice of a child growing up in pain. It was the voice of a story that had been smoothed over by an adult and then placed in her mouth. Isla had been standing nearby that day. She did not defend me, but she did not chase me away either. She only stood there silently, looking deeply uncomfortable. Later, that silence itself became the most painful kind of confirmation, that I really had come looking for my daughter, that I really had stood there, that I really had been rejected, and had not simply disappeared the way William had told other people I did. Then Vincent Perry surfaced in my memory like a forgotten puzzle piece. Vincent had worked with William for a short time, and once he ran into me by chance in a parking lot, and blurted out a question about why I was still asking for more money, when William had said I already took almost everything in the divorce. I froze. Because that entire time, I had been the one barely scraping by, and the child support had not even arrived in a proper trickle. When I asked him what he meant, Vincent hesitated, and then said he had heard William say I cheated, walked out on the family, and was now still greedy for money. A few weeks later, Penelope Hall, whom everyone now seems to think is my daughter, even though she was actually just someone from our old social circle, also let it slip that she had once heard William say, I had chosen freedom over family. That was when I finally saw it clearly. He had not lied in a moment of impulse. He had built an entire system. Each person knew only a little, but all those small pieces pointed in the same direction, turning me into a traitor in my daughter's eyes. That night, I opened the old box I kept under my bed. Inside were birthday cards I had never been able to send, letters returned to me, photos of Penelope when she was little with her arms wrapped around my neck and laughing breathlessly, and all the letters I had written and then had nowhere to send once I was blocked through every possible line of contact. I turned over each item as if I were turning over the remains of a life. Then my hand touched a crumpled envelope, wedged deep at the bottom of the box, different from everything else. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Penelope's. And the moment I picked it up, I understood that maybe she had once come very close to the truth, close enough to write me something, and then somehow had been pulled away all over again. I sat motionless for a long time before I dared slide my finger under the edge of the envelope, because I knew that if I opened it, I might have to face the exact day my daughter truly began to hate me. I used to think the worst kind of pain was standing at the door of my old house, with a birthday gift for my daughter in my hands, only to watch the courier set it back on my own doorstep a few days later, still sealed, bow still tied, even the card I had rewritten 3 times before I found the courage to send it. But later, I learned that a returned gift still wasn't the coldest thing my heart had ever known. What made me feel like someone was peeling my skin off layer by layer was the moment I accidentally saw Penelope at a supermarket 4 years ago. She was taller than I had imagined, hair tied back neatly, a box of cereal tucked in her arms. I recognized her in a single blink. Penelope looked at me a little longer, long enough to know it was me, then looked away as if I were a stranger blocking the aisle. No anger, no tears, not even hesitation, just coldness. And that coldness hurt more than any insult could have. I wrote her dozens of letters over those years. Some ran several pages. Some were only a few lines on days when I didn't have the strength to pretend I was okay. I sent emails, graduation cards, birthday cards, and Christmas cards. Once, I picked out the exact novel Penelope had loved when she was 12. I even remembered how she used to fold the page corners instead of using a bookmark. That gift came back too, the wrapping paper slightly creased from shipping, and my name on the label crossed out with a thick black line. I sat there staring at that mark for a long time. The person who crossed out my name could have been a delivery worker, or it could have been someone else, but the feeling of being erased from my daughter's life was exactly the same. I kept sending things anyway. Not because I was naive enough to believe that one day everything would simply turn out fine again, but because I needed her to know I had never walked away. Whether Penelope read any of it or not, I wanted proof to exist in this world that her mother had kept knocking until her hands bled. Then, in the middle of a pile of old paperwork, that pain was dragged in another direction, sharper, dirtier. That day, I was looking for old tuition receipts, planning to check whether the college fund I had opened for Penelope when she was 8 was still growing the way it was supposed to. That was money I had set aside for her alone, money I never touched. Even when the divorce forced me to almost start my life over from scratch. I had cut back on everything, taken extra shifts, given up things I loved just to keep that account intact. In my mind, no matter how much my daughter hated me, her future still had to be protected. At first, I thought I was seeing it wrong. The balance didn't match. There were withdrawals from years earlier mixed in between my regular contributions. I called the bank, keeping my voice steady, telling myself it could just be a technical adjustment, maybe an old linked account that had never been fully separated after the divorce. But the more I checked, the colder my hands became. Those withdrawals were not system errors. They had dates, transaction codes, verified electronic signatures. I pulled up old emails, old statements, even notices I had skimmed past because back then, my mind had been consumed with only one thing: how to see my daughter again. I found far too many things I had missed. An email notifying me of a change in account access that I had never answered. A transaction alert I had opened in the middle of the night and then forgotten because I had court the next morning. All the scattered pieces began locking together into a shape that made me sick. Dylan Scott was the one who accidentally pushed the final piece toward me. I met him when I went in to ask about old financial records tied to the account separation after the divorce. Dylan didn't look at me with pity. And he didn't act like some savior either. He simply flipped through one file after another, frowned, and said something that made me sit up straight. If I remember correctly, there was a request to update the authorized user very early on, almost immediately after the two of you separated. I asked who made that change. Dylan hesitated for a few seconds, then slid an old, faded statement across to me. You should look at it yourself. I looked down at the lines of text, and could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. William had been touching that money far longer than I had realized. Not once, but many times. Not by accident, but systematically. My throat tightened, but when the words came out, they were as sharp as broken glass. He didn't just take my daughter from me, he took the future I had set aside for her, too. Dylan said nothing. He only lifted one finger and pointed to another line lower down, a few rows beneath William's name. I leaned closer. And then I went completely still. Because William Mitchell was not the only person who had withdrawn money. The second name on that statement was so familiar that a chill ran straight down my spine, and in that moment, I understood. For the past 8 years, William had not been the only one behind Penelope being pushed away from me. I didn't go looking for Penelope right after I ran into her at the supermarket that year. Back then, I was still too shaken to understand what her evasive eyes really meant. But after tracing the bank statements, cross-checking the dates on the letters that had been returned, and rereading every old message, the name Penelope Hall kept surfacing so often that I could no longer lie to myself. She wasn't at the center of everything, but she had always been close enough to nudge a sentence, plant an idea, confirm half a truth at exactly the right moment. I asked Penelope to meet me at a small cafe not far from our old neighborhood. She arrived 10 minutes late and sat down across from me with a guarded expression. I didn't bother with small talk. "I'm only going to ask this once, Penelope. What did you say to my daughter during those years?" She looked at me, her hand tightening around her glass until her knuckles turned white. "Layla, that was a long time ago. What's the point of digging it up now?" I laughed, and even to my own ears it sounded cold. "Old to you. To me, it was 8 years of being seen as a mother who abandoned her child. So talk." Penelope said nothing for a few seconds, then let out a long, slow breath. She didn't deny it immediately, and she didn't act innocent. That silence alone told me I was on the right track. "I never completely made things up," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I only repeated what I saw. What you saw, or what William Mitchell wanted you to see." That made her freeze. I leaned forward, pressing every word into her. "You told my daughter I didn't come to pick her up. You told her I was more committed to work than to being a mother. You confirmed to her that I sent money inconsistently, called only when I felt like it, showed up only when I needed to protect my image. You knew that wasn't true." Penelope pressed her lips together. "William told me you were trying to create evidence to gain leverage after the divorce. And did you believe him? Or did you choose to believe him because it was more convenient for you?" She looked up, and something in her expression changed. The defensiveness was gone. What was left was exhaustion. I owed William. I went still for a beat. Penelope spoke in a low, hurried voice. That year, she had made a mistake on an accounting file at her old company. The discrepancy wasn't huge, but it was enough to cost her her job and drag her into a lawsuit if it came to light. William knew about it because he was the one who had helped her fix the books. In return, when he needed someone close enough to my daughter to confirm a few things in front of her, Penelope couldn't say no. At first, it was just a few vague remarks. Then it became deliberate whispers. That I broke promises. That I said one thing and did another. That I only reached out to my daughter when it benefited me. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought once she grew up, she'd understand on her own." I looked at her, anger rising so hard inside me it caught in my throat. How exactly was a child supposed to figure that out, when every adult around her was bending the truth in the same direction? Penelope lowered her head. For the first time, what I saw in her wasn't avoidance. It was real shame, but that shame didn't give me back 8 years. It didn't give me back the day my daughter blocked me on every platform without a single question, without giving me one chance to explain. From what Penelope told me, I was able to piece together a sequence so chilling it made my skin crawl. There hadn't been one single event that made my daughter cut me off. It had been a whole quiet campaign, stretched out over time, steady and methodical. A message that was kept from her. A visit that was twisted into something else. A gift sent back with the wrong explanation attached. An offhand comment from Penelope that sounded harmless. A moment when William made himself look patient and long-suffering in front of her while I was falling apart. Piece by piece, he turned me into the kind of mother who only showed up when she needed to prove she was decent. I stood up, ready to leave, when Penelope called after me. Her face had gone pale, like she had just decided to say something that should have stayed buried. "Layla, there's one more thing. Back then, it wasn't just messages and letters. There was a recording." I turned around sharply. "A recording of what?" "A conversation between you and William during the worst period of your breakdown as a couple. I never heard the whole thing, but I know he kept it." Later, Vincent Perry once told me he had heard part of it, and that if anyone heard the full recording, your daughter would understand just how badly the truth had been twisted. My heart slammed so hard it hurt in my chest. A recording. Something that could restore my name, or bury the last of my hope if it had vanished for good. And hearing the name Vincent Perry made me realize something else. The door that had been slammed in my face for 8 years might not have been locked after all. I laughed in Penelope's face when she stood at my door 8 days ago, her voice cold as metal, circling around the subject of money and inheritance after William died. That laugh wasn't triumph, and it certainly wasn't because I'd won. It was the laugh of someone who had been silenced for too long, and when the person who once turned their back on you suddenly steps closer, your first instinct is to throw a wall up in front of your chest. That night, my phone lit up. Penelope had unblocked me. I stared at the notification for a long time before touching it. 8 years. Just one small movement on a screen, and yet it felt like someone had cracked open a door that had been sealed shut with anger, misunderstanding, and pride. When I reopened our old conversation, the messages I had sent over the years stretched down the screen in a line so long it hurt to look at. You don't have to reply right away. I just need you to know, I didn't do what you think I did. I'm outside your school gate. If you don't want to see me yet, I'll leave right away. Happy birthday, Penelope. I still kept the cake you like. I don't need your forgiveness right now. I just need one day when you're willing to listen. Reading my own words again made my throat go dry. There were messages I had forgotten I'd even sent. Some were so short they felt brutal, because I knew that if I wrote more, no one would read it anyway. Under every line was the same delivery mark, then nothing but absolute silence. All those years, my daughter had lived inside a story with only one side, and I had been talking to a wall. Close to midnight, Penelope finally wrote back. I read them. Just those 3 words, and I had to put my phone down because my hands were shaking. But I would not let myself go soft, I replied slowly. Reading is not the same as understanding. 5 minutes later, she sent me the address of a quiet cafe downtown and asked to meet the next morning. I got there early. When Penelope walked in, I realized she was no longer the girl who used to avoid my eyes in the supermarket years ago. Her face held exhaustion, guardedness, and a kind of pain she was forcing down. She sat across from me and skipped any polite greeting. I didn't come back so I could listen to you perform your innocence again. I looked her straight in the eye. Good, because I'm not here to beg for your pity. The air between us was so tight that even the sound of a spoon touching a cup at the next table felt like an impact. Penelope took a breath, then asked bluntly, "Then what do you want?" "From you?" I leaned forward. "I want to know whether you came back for money, or because for the first time in your life you've started to doubt the person you trusted absolutely." Her face hardened. "Do you really think I'm that low?" I didn't look away. "You want a share of my assets, but in the last 8 years, did you give me even a share of the right to speak?" Penelope bit down on her lip. I saw her throat tighten, like she was swallowing back something sharp. A moment later, she pulled several sheets of paper from her bag, folded over again, and placed them on the table. Bank statements, transfer records, a few handwritten notes from William, and a loan application with my name on it and a forged signature, the very thing it had taken me years to trace even part of. "I found them in Dad's safe," she said, her voice lower now, "after the funeral." I didn't reach for the papers right away. I just looked at her. "So in the end, you finally decided to open your eyes. Don't talk like you're glad my father is dead." That hit deep and old. I let out a laugh, but this time it wasn't cold, it was tired. "Do you see it now, Penelope? The moment his name comes up, you immediately take his side again. That is exactly why we haven't been able to talk for 8 years. She looked at me, her eyes reddening. I don't know who to believe anymore. For the first time, I saw something on her face besides blame. There was collapse there, confusion. The fear of a daughter who had just realized the father she had built in her mind might have been nothing more than a carefully painted version of the truth. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand. I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be all right. But the anger I had held inside for 8 years was still there, burning like coals in my chest. I could not accept being sought out only after William's statue had started to crack. I opened my phone and scrolled down to an old audio file I had kept separate for years. My finger hovered over the send button for a few seconds. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice low and steady. "After you open this, you won't be able to go back to believing the old version of the story." Penelope stared at my screen, her face going pale. "What is that?" "It's what I kept to survive 8 years of being condemned." I hit send. Her phone vibrated almost instantly. The screen showed scene. Penelope opened the audio file, her fingers stopping over the play icon, and I sat still, knowing with perfect clarity that the moment she touched it, 8 years of silence would be ripped wide open right there at that table. I didn't reply to Penelope's last message right away. I called Vincent first. Vincent arrived quickly, carrying the old phone he'd mentioned earlier, the one he had kept after helping clear out archived files for William's former company. He set it down on the table, looked at me, then at Penelope, who was sitting rigidly on the edge of the sofa. No one said anything for the first few seconds. The room was so quiet I could hear my fingertips tapping against the side of my glass. Vincent opened the audio file, his voice dropping lower. "I haven't edited anything. The date is still on the device. I kept it because at first I thought it might be connected to the money from her future fund." Then William's voice came through. I had heard that man thousands of times before, gentle, cold, saying exactly the kinds of things that could make anyone believe he was the most devoted father in the world. But this recording had none of that coding. William's voice was low, clear, and cruel in its calmness. "If she still trusts Layla, I lose control. Let her think her mother walked away. It makes everything easier. When she's older, even if she's angry, she'll be angry at Layla first. She won't come back and question me." Penelope broke down the moment she heard that. I couldn't even cry. My whole body went cold, as if after 8 years of being twisted, silenced, and looked at with contempt, there was finally one real sound proving I wasn't crazy. The recording didn't stop there. William went on about the money in the future fund, the one he had sworn was being saved for our daughter's college education. "Take part of it out early. Just leave it on paper as an adjustment expense. If Layla asks, tell her I borrowed it temporarily and I'll put it back later. She won't make a scene. She's always afraid the girl will get hurt." Every word cut straight into my chest. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was calculated. I turned to Penelope. Her face had gone white, her lips trembling without making a sound. For the first time in all those years, she wasn't looking at me like I was on trial. She was looking at me like someone who had just stepped out of ruins. She had always believed that person had torn down with her own hands. Vincent spoke again, slowly, stressing each word. He confirmed the timeline of the withdrawals, matched them against the financial records, and the transfers that were never returned. Penelope, choking on her words, admitted that William had pulled her into half-true, half-false stories, using the pitiful image of a husband abandoned by his wife to make her believe him, then repeat those stories in front of my daughter. The more she confessed, the less she could bring herself to lift her eyes to mine. When they were finished, I finally spoke. My voice was rough, not loud, but enough to make both of them fall completely silent. "I didn't abandon you, but I was wrong to let someone else tell my story for me." The moment I said it, I felt it pierce me too. I had stayed silent for too long. I had tried to protect William's dignity, tried to believe that one day my daughter would grow up, understand on her own, and find her way back to me. Real life does not wait for people who do nothing but endure. My silence didn't protect anyone. It only helped the lie live longer. Penelope burst into tears. Not the kind of crying that comes from losing an argument or getting caught. This was the sobbing of a child who had just realized nearly a decade of her youth had been built on a false version of her own mother. She looked at me for a long time. There was no sharpness left in her eyes now, none of the guardedness I knew too well from the day she stood in front of my gate. It was as if she were trying to piece together every old memory, every text I sent that went unanswered, every letter returned to me, every empty birthday she had been taught to believe was my fault. Then she asked, in a voice so small I thought I had heard it wrong, "Is it too late now for me to call you Mom again?" I went completely still. Penelope's question still hung in the room after the recording ended. If all of it was true, why didn't you fight to get me back? Not even once, all the way to the end. I looked at her for a long moment. 8 years of blame, contempt, and cold distance suddenly seemed to shrink into the face of a girl trying not to fall apart. I wanted so badly to step forward and hold her the way I had when she was little, but I didn't. Some cracks, if you seal them too quickly, only split open again later, worse and deeper than before. I spoke slowly, letting each word settle between us. Because I did try, Penelope. I tried in the only way someone stripped of her voice could while still holding on to the last bit of her dignity. I sent letters. I sent messages. I asked people to pass along my words. You blocked me. That house shut every door. And at the time, I had just lost in a divorce and been turned into a greedy woman who abandoned her husband and her child. Where I was wrong was in staying silent for too long, thinking that when you grew up, you would see it for yourself. I gambled on time, and I lost. Penelope lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled, but I did not save her from that feeling. Some pain has to be fully felt before a person can truly change. I pulled the remaining stack of letters closer to me, then placed it on the table between us. What you need right now isn't a share of an inheritance. What you need is to walk the truth all the way through. If you want to step back into my life, there are 3 things we will have to go through together: the truth, an apology, and responsibility. She lifted her face, eyes red and wet. I continued, my voice steady, but not softening. You have to read every one of these letters, listen to everything Vincent managed to keep. Face the way you chose to believe one side, the way you spoke about me, the way you cut me off for 8 years. I have my share of responsibility too. I will not stay silent anymore. I will call everything by its real name, including my own weakness. Vincent sat quietly in the chair across from us, and only then did he slide over a thin file. Dylan had gone back through the money William had withdrawn from the fund set aside for Penelope, the amounts disguised through old paperwork and transfers routed through personal accounts. Everything was clear now. Money had never been the center of this tragedy, but it was the coldest proof of just how carefully the lie had been built. Isla sat beside Penelope, one hand resting on her knee like a silent anchor. Jade Brooks stood near the window, her face seeming to age years in a single night. Connor Turner no longer carried that old certainty about him. He looked at the pile of letters, then at me, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that looked like shame. And William, the man who had once controlled this family's entire story, had finally been returned to where he belonged, the center of the chain of lies, but he no longer had the power to stand between me and my daughter. Penelope pressed her lips together, her voice breaking. If I apologize now, is it too late, Mom? I shook my head. An apology is never meaningless, but an apology by itself is not enough. I don't need a daughter coming back only because she sees that I have assets. I need a Penelope mature enough to look straight at the cruel part of herself, and then choose to live differently. She burst into tears. This time, I let the moment sit for a few seconds before I pulled the box of tissues toward her. A small gesture, just enough for her to understand that I was not closing the door, but that the door would not swing open just because of a few tears either. I opened the drawer and took out the last envelope. There was no will inside, only copies of every letter I had ever written, arranged by date. I placed it in front of her. As for the inheritance, I'm not making that decision today, I said. If you want to stay, then read them all. Read them not like someone who came to claim her share, but like a daughter learning her mother's story from the beginning. Penelope stared at the stack of letters for a long time, then reached out with trembling hands and took it. She didn't open it right away. She only looked up at me, and for the first time in 8 years, her eyes held no defensiveness. It wasn't peace yet either. It was something far more fragile than that, the kind of courage that begins in shame. Outside on the porch, the rain had started to lighten. The house was the same, the tea table was the same, only the distance between us was no longer planted at opposite ends. That door had not fully reopened. But for the first time in 8 years, my daughter and I were no longer pounding against it from different sides. We were standing on the same side, quietly looking at the part of life we had lost, and deciding that this time, we would walk through it with the truth.